news was in fact big enough to justify that. As the New York Times put it in their coverage of this story today, quote, the Supreme Court's order set in motion a series of events that could lead to the startling possibility of a criminal trial of a former U.S. president. The former U.S. president in question soon affirmed that when he released a rambling and even for him almost hysterical statement in response to the Supreme Court ruling, saying, quote, the people of our country won't stand for it. He called the ruling of the court, quote, fascism. He was rambling about the court, rambling about what he called, quote, all the election crimes that were committed against me. Really, election crimes committed against you. He said in his statement that he won the last election and therefore Joe Biden isn't even really the president. I don't know why that claim is at all relevant to the Supreme Court ruling that he is freaking out about here, but it seems clear that that's what he's going to say from here on out whenever he freaks out about anything. That's going to be kind of his go-to. This isn't happening. I'm secretly still the president in my mind. This can't all be true. The Supreme Court's ruling today was issued in a short, unsigned opinion with no noted dissents, was that no one, not even a man who believes in his heart of hearts that the earth is flat or that Donald Trump was reelected, no one is immune from investigation if prosecutors believe they have committed crimes and they have a legal predicate to move forward with such an investigation. No one is above the law. In August 2019, it was state prosecutors in New York who sent a subpoena for Trump's financial and tax records to the accounting firm used by the president and his business. And President Trump pulled out all the stops to try to block this subpoena from ever being effectuated. He sued to stop the firm from complying with the subpoena. That case went to the United States Supreme Court twice. He lost both times at the Supreme Court. He also lost at every lower court the case was heard in as well. His legal avenues are now well and truly exhausted. The accounting firm is now going to hand over the data. Multiple news reports tonight describing their expected production to prosecutors as millions of pages of tax returns and financial documents, millions of pages, terabytes full of data. Prosecutors will reportedly collect this information, the New York Times says this week, from the accounting firm's lawyers in Westchester County, New York. Prosecutors will get access to those millions of pages and then get to work examining them and determining if they prove a crime. Prosecutors have already retained a large outside consulting firm that specializes in crunching this kind of data. The prosecutor's office has also brought in a heavy-hitting outside counsel who's a former chief of the criminal division and the chief of the appellate division at SDNY. He's a lawyer with a decades-long history of white-collar and organized crime prosecution and defense work. The investigation that led to this point started with the investigation into payments made during the 2016 campaign. Payments to two women designed to keep them from talking publicly about their alleged affairs with candidate Trump. Those payments were made to benefit the campaign of candidate Trump, and they were designated and prosecuted as campaign finance felonies by prosecutors in SDNY. The president's lawyer, Michael Cohen, who facilitated those payments, he went to prison for those felonies. But those payments that Mr. Cohen made to those women to benefit the president's campaign, those payments were reimbursed by the president's business. Reimbursed in a way that was apparently designed to look as if they were payments to Michael Cohen for legal services. That is not what they were, but that is how they were processed through the Trump organization's financial systems. Now, depending on how exactly that was done, that cover-up could be a crime related to keeping fraudulent business records. If those fake legal expenses reimbursed to Michael Cohen were ultimately deducted in the Trump organization's taxes, that could also be tax fraud. Michael Cohen, of course, then testified to Congress and provided documentation attesting to what he described as a long-running scheme by the former president and his business to defraud insurance companies and banks and tax authorities. He described a scheme in which the president and his business radically changed the valuation of various properties depending on who was asking. They basically kept two sets of books in Michael Cohen's telling. When it came time to pay taxes on a property, Trump would call the property basically worthless. But when it came time to use that property as collateral to get, a loan from a bank or something, well, then suddenly that same property would be worth the sun and the moon and the stars, which is a cute way to do it. Also, it's potentially tax fraud, bank fraud, and insurance fraud. But then came September 2020 feels like it was 30 years ago. It was like several months ago. It's only February now. This was only September when it happened. It feels like a million years ago. September 2020, in the pages of the New York Times, we came to learn in very dramatic fashion why exactly President Trump had been working so hard on keeping his tax and financial records hidden, why he was working harder on that than on anything else in the whole country. We learned why he was so panicked about keeping these things under wraps in September, when the New York Times reporters, through separate means, obtained more than 2 decades of Trump tax records. And that reporting, those documents that the Times obtained threw off a world war's worth of bombshells. I mean, the president, a self-described billionaire, turns out he paid a grand total of $750 in federal income tax in 2016, which was the year he ran for president. Then in 2017, his first year in the White House, he again paid a grand total of $750 in federal income tax. In 10 of the previous 15 years, he paid $0 in federal income tax. He paid nothing. The Times reported that he owed as much as $100 million to the federal government in back taxes and penalties. They reported that the president had apparently paid his daughter Ivanka as an employee of the Trump Organization and then double-dipped, also paid her as a consultant to the Trump Organization. Why does that matter? Well, the money that he paid her as a consultant, he deducted from his taxes as a business expense. And that may sound like an arcane little bit of accounting mishigas, but that's a kind of fraud that other people regularly go to prison for. And now Trump tax and business records by the millions are in the hands of state prosecutors for the first time. Prosecutors who are reportedly investigating him for tax fraud, bank fraud, insurance fraud. Now, lots of questions remain as to why federal prosecutors did not pursue Mr. Trump for prosecution after they named him as individual one, this unindicted co-conspirator, in the federal case for which Michael Cohen went to prison. Lots of questions remain as to what happened to the culpability of individual one in that case, let alone the president's business and those who signed off on those bogus checks to Michael Cohen, which were really repayments for the campaign finance felonies he was committing, but were disguised to look like business expenses. One of the things that Merrick Garland is going to have to sort out when he is confirmed as the nation's next attorney general is why his predecessor, William Barr, personally spent weeks leaning on prosecutors at SDNY to try to get them to go easy on that case. And then Barr ultimately fired the U.S. attorney in charge of that office. Merrick Garland is going to have to sort that out. The solution to that cannot be don't do it again. The solution to that has to be accountability for those who abused the Justice Department and the justice process in ways that were designed to shield the president from accountability, if that is in fact what happened there. But what's happened here, what the Supreme Court set in motion today, is something that does not involve federal prosecutors in that whole SDNY mess. These are state prosecutors. And their case is moving forward. And there really is now, as the Times puts it today, the startling prospect of a criminal trial of a former U.S. president. We, the public, will not get to see these millions of pages that are getting handed over now. We won't see them unless and until there are criminal charges filed in this case and they surface as evidence in that case. The closest we can get now is maybe to talk to the reporters for the New York Times who have themselves seen more information like this than any other civilian we can talk to. Reporters who, in fact, won the Pulitzer Prize for their reporting on exactly this scandal. One of those reporters is Suzanne Craig, investigative reporter for the New York Times. She joins us now. Ms. Craig, Suzanne, it's really nice of you to make time to be here tonight. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
From what you understand of the scope of the subpoena that was the basis of the Supreme Court ruling today, do you think that prosecutors are about to get their hands on a subset of what you and your colleagues saw at the Times, or do you think they are getting considerably more than what you guys were able to see?
When it comes to the tax returns, they're going to get a subset. They're going to see 8 years of the tax returns, and we had over 2 decades of the tax returns. So in that sense, they're going to be seeing less. But they're getting just an entire universe more of information in terms of other documents that have been subpoenaed that could be really critical to actually making the case. And that includes communication between Donald Trump and his accountants, audited financial statements, communication that has gone back and forth and a whole other array of documents that are going to be produced that sort of explain sort of what went into the taxes in a lot more detail.
In terms of the communications between the president and his business and the accounting firm, or indeed the communications among people at the accounting firm who were working on this account, why would those be so valuable potentially to prosecutors who are looking to try to uncover evidence of the kind of white-collar fraud that I just described?
When you see tax returns, are really important, but they're sort of top line. So if I use an example, so there's a lot of questions, and you mentioned it, about the payment to Stormy Daniels and to other potential hush money that was paid. We saw the tax returns, those payments aren't itemized, but there's a lot of places that those payments could go. For example, legal fees is a likely one, and they could have been put into a line where, legal fees are a tax deduction, but they're not itemized on a tax return. But prosecutors could now get really detailed information that goes at exactly what was in those legal fees, and they could find something there. So that's one really clear example of where they're probably going to look right away. They can get all of that. They're also going to see communication back and forth. So you're going to see, the decisions that were made about what to file. What did the Trump organization or Donald Trump tell his accountants? Were there misrepresentations there? So a lot of things are really important in the pieces that go into it. We did a story in 2018 where we found tax fraud that Donald Trump had committed in the 1990s. We did that by piecing together financial statements, bank statements, general ledgers, public information, but it was a whole, kind of puzzle that we had to put together. Financial statement or tax returns are kind of your best case when you're submitting to the IRS. There's actually a line where you can say, I accepted a bribe. People don't usually fill it in, but it's usually you're not filing something that's just apparently illegal.
Suzanne, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today was seeing your reaction to this Supreme Court ruling. One of the things you talked about as a potentially sort of dangerous area for the president might be these consulting fees that he paid to his daughter, Ivanka Trump. You also pointed out that there are a lot of unanswered questions about something that happened in 2016, where the president, when he was running for president, his campaign was sort of low on funds, and you and your colleagues were able to report that he engineered a big cash windfall himself that appeared to originate with a Las Vegas hotel. I wonder if you could walk us through sort of both of those concerns, the Las Vegas issue and the Ivanka issue, in terms of what the potential pitfalls might be there for the president.
Let's start with the payments, the consulting payments to Ivanka Trump. And then what's interesting about this, she got a lot of money for consulting payments. We don't know the totality of it. We were able to specifically identify some of it. The question there is, she was an executive at the company, so why is she getting consulting payments? And that could be, it could be a potentially illegal issue there for them. And then I think they're going to be looking at her siblings. Did they also get these consulting fees? What did they do for that, since they were already on the payroll at the Trump organization that warranted these special payments? And then with the Las Vegas hotel, very interesting. In 2016, he got several one-time, really outsized cash payments, more than $20 million that we could see flowing from a hotel in Vegas that he co-owns with another individual, two companies that Donald Trump alone controls, and then they went out as just huge cash distributions in the middle of the election. He's said that there are agreements underpinning these. We could identify, on a couple of occasions, a couple of the payments where there was an agreement, others were not sure. We haven't seen those agreements, so we don't know. And I think that's one of the things that probably investigators are going to look at when they can get in and start to understand what's there. Let's see the agreement. What did he tell his accountants about it? They were very unusual, and it was $30 million coming to him, as during 2016 when he was, his campaign was running low on cash.
It's amazing that we had a candidate for president, ultimately a successful candidate for president, who engineered a mysterious $20 or $30 million payment to himself in the middle of his campaign. And all these years later, it's still a total black box.
No, those were, I feel like they were shocking.
Go ahead.
No, they were shocking to see when we could actually trace the money through. It was a significant amount of money that we couldn't really explain. And they wouldn't provide us with the underlying agreements that they said existed for these just massive cash infusions. It suddenly came to him just as he needed money.
One of the things that I have always found difficult about this story from beginning to end, having read every word of your reporting on this, having read a whole bunch of books that touch on this subject, having followed it so closely, is that I feel like I'm at a disadvantage because I'm not sure how bad the context is in which he appears to have been a bad actor. And again, I'm not supposing any criminal behavior by the president. I realize this is an open investigation. No charges have been filed. He, of course, denies any wrongdoing. But it is my impression that the New York high-end real estate market is sort of scummy and gray area enough in terms of legality and money laundering and all sorts of gross stuff that the president might be a sort of normal actor for New York City real estate standards. And that it's therefore hard for me to understand whether his behavior will be seen as essentially normal for a gross pseudo illegal area of business, or whether what he's done really stands out even in that sector.
Well, I think your New York real estate, they do get a lot of tax deductions, but that's one thing. I mean, the things that we're talking about are much different than that. What were their payments, potentially hush money paid to women so that they wouldn't talk and then used as a tax deduction? That has nothing to do with being a real estate developer in New York. So there's a lot of things that are outside of that. I mean, we've talked about the appraisals, and there's been a lot of attention on that. And that's going to be one thing that's going to be interesting to watch. And when you look at that, I mean, it's not an easy case. People who use appraisals, they usually rely on they hire an appraiser. So you've hired a professional. And they can point to that and say, we relied on professional advice. So what they're going to be looking for in cases like that is, did Donald Trump go and did he shop for appraisals till he found the one he liked? We've seen that, plenty of times in New York where people do that. That's one example that fits into what you're saying. And, all we can see on a lot of things when we look at tax information is the final appraisal that arrives. I think Cy Vance in New York is going to be trying to find out if he went appraisal shopping or did he put undue pressure on the appraiser.
Suzanne Craig, investigative reporter for the New York Times, one of the only humans on earth who could preview for us what these prosecutors are just about to get their hands on. Thanks for helping us understand. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you too.
All right, we've got much more ahead here tonight. Stay with us. New York Times wins the prize for the most eloquent summary of today's plot twist involving the potential criminal trial of a former president of the United States for the first time in U.S. history. Times saying today, quote, the Supreme Court's order set in motion a series of events that could lead to the startling possibility of a criminal trial of a former U.S. president. They win the eloquent summary, but the prize for brevity today goes to the New York prosecutor whose office learned today that the Supreme Court had decisively cleared the way for something that President Trump fought for a very long time and fought very hard to try to block from happening. Former President Trump's taxes and financial records will be handed over to a grand jury. Upon receiving the Supreme Court's ruling clearing the way for that today, District Attorney Cy Vance's response was 3 words. He said, quote, the work continues, period. Dan Alonzo was Cy Vance's top deputy for 4 years at that prosecutor's office. If anybody can tell us what today's plot twist means for Mr. Vance's criminal investigation into Donald Trump and what this may mean for the former president, Mr. Alonzo is my bet. Joining us now is Dan Alonzo. He's a former federal prosecutor and a former New York prosecutor who did serve as chief assistant DA under Cy Vance. Mr. Alonzo, it's a real pleasure to have you with us tonight. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
I am not a lawyer, and I want to give you a chance first to set me straight if there's anything that I have explained about this court ruling and its implications that strikes you wrong or that you think I might have gotten the wrong way around.
No, I think you got it pretty much right, and your previous guest obviously is incredibly well versed in this stuff. So you got it right. I mean, to a certain extent, we're all speculating a little bit, right? It's educated speculation. Mm-hmm. We know from the DA in some statements made in court, and we know from some of the great reporting that's been done that there are maybe 6 to 8 areas of inquiry that they are tracking down. But we can't know, whether they have smoking guns, whether they can really prove intent to defraud, as Suzanne was saying. So there are definitely a lot of questions to be answered, but I would say that today's development is huge, not just because it's significant, but also because they probably bought themselves millions of pages to have to sift through now.
When you say 6 to 8 areas of inquiry and this being potential huge consequences, how serious are the crimes that are potentially implicated here? Obviously, again, there have been no charges. The president and his business deny all wrongdoing, and we won't know anything about what the grand jury has done until they present evidence in court, if they ever do. But given what has been publicly reporting about what they are looking at and the types of allegations that have been made by people who know something about these business practices, are these the sorts of things for which people get a fine and are sort of slap on the wrist, or are these potentially serious charges?
I mean, look, as with so many things in the law, they are, it depends. So obviously there are very many serious charges that they're considering. Just the fact that they're saying the words insurance fraud, tax fraud, bank fraud, those are all serious charges. Now, do they require time in prison? Only at the high end. So we'd have to know whether the loss was high enough to require a judge to put whomever behind bars. Lower level felonies don't require it, but they do permit it. So we really need to know how much loss they can prove, whether that's tax loss or loss to the banks or loss to insurance companies or intended loss. We can, once we know that, we can start to figure it out. But I'd say all of these are at least potentially felonies. And so I'd say that by itself makes them quite serious.
And Dan, in terms of what you know about the operations of this office, it's one thing for us in the journalism world and as citizens to talk about millions of pages being handed over, terabytes full of data. But from a prosecutor's perspective and from the perspective of people trying to put together potential felony charges here, how long does it take to go through something like that? I mean, it sounds like kind of a life's work, and presumably you need certain people quarterbacking it and organizing other people to work on it, delegating different pieces of it out. How big a job is this? How much time do you expect that much paperwork? How much time do you expect it to take prosecutors to go through it?
Well, on one hand, it's an enormous job. And if this happened when I was first starting out as a prosecutor 30 years ago, I'd say the sky's the limit as to how long it would take. But today, the DA and the consultant that he's hired have very serious data analytics tools that can be used to sort through what they have to kind of very quickly do the kinds of searches that will get them to, separate the wheat from the chaff pretty quickly. Those start out as just simple word searches, and number searches, but they involve artificial intelligence. So I think that they'll be able to do this, relatively quickly. This is very complicated. The New York real estate industry is extremely complicated to begin with. So they have experts guiding them on how that works and how all these, 500 or so LLCs work together. But I think at the end of the day, they're really going to be, right now they already know what they want to look for. So they're going to start there, and then they'll do the sort of bigger sifting through this stuff. So it'll take a while for sure, but it's not an impossible task, not in 2021.
Dan, there's also been some very interesting reporting in recent days that the office has brought in a very prominent former federal prosecutor and high-level white-collar defense attorney, a man named Mark Pomerantz, who's real pedigree in New York law. And he's going to be involved in the Trump investigation only, signed on as a special assistant DA in the office for that purpose. There's also reporting, very recent reporting, that Mr. Pomerantz recently, within the last few days, re-interviewed Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer, who, of course, went to prison for these campaign finance felonies and other charges, and who has made a lot of serious allegations about the president that seem to track at least somewhat with these tax fraud, bank fraud, insurance fraud allegations that we've had in public reporting, heard described as the potential contours of this investigation. What do you think of the appointment of Pomerantz, and does it surprise you that he's talking again to Michael Cohen? Is Michael Cohen going to end up being a valuable witness here?
Well, for sure, you said it correctly. Pomerantz is a prominent lawyer. He's what we call a heavy hitter. So that's a good thing because he will have seen cases of this magnitude before in civil and criminal contexts. I will put in a plug for my former colleagues. The office already has some fantastic assistant DAs that have been working on this case for a while. So I think even without Mark Pomerantz, the case would have been in good hands. I think that only enhances it to have him in the case. In terms of Michael Cohen, very interesting. So I actually watched the Cohen hearing today when he testified before Congress, and some of the attacks that were made by the Republicans will probably be made if he testifies in a trial, assuming that Trump or someone close to him is indicted. And I thought those, if handled correctly by the prosecutor, those will ring hollow. Basically, the attack is, this is a perjuring witness. This is somebody who lied to Congress. How dare we have as a witness somebody who lied to Congress? Well, okay, but that doesn't end the story. I mean, I put witnesses on the stand who had committed perjury, who had asked others to commit perjury, and that's not the question. If that was the question, then we wouldn't put them on the stand. The question is not whether they lied before, it's whether they're telling the truth now. And so you got to ask yourself, well, why did Michael Cohen lie to Congress? Well, it was obviously to protect Donald Trump. And it's not like Donald Trump corrected that testimony afterwards, even though he presumably knew the truth. So you have to ask yourself, is whatever Michael Cohen's going to say corroborated by other evidence? And that's a lot of what they're doing now by pouring through these documents, other evidence and other documents and other witnesses too. So no, I think Michael Cohen could be a significant witness, but I think he's got warts. So it's got to be a very careful prosecutor who puts everything out on the table, warts and all, so the jury can see it all. But I do think that he could be a persuasive witness if properly corroborated.
And, nothing corroborates like millions of pages of documents that the president fought tooth and nail to try to keep hidden. Dan Alonso, former federal prosecutor, veteran of the New York State Prosecutor's Office, that's Cy Vance's team, and Cy Vance's team that just got this incredible ruling today, decisive ruling from the Supreme Court. Dan, thanks very much for helping us understand. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, we got a lot more to get to this busy Monday night. Stay with us. Trainer Bob, very nervous. There's the First Lady with that group of people working out. Michelle Obama, April 2012, encouraging American families to get moving, to be fit and healthy. Watching the First Lady in action like that for a good cause, trying to encourage people, doing crunches and lunges and jumping jacks, that was inspiring to a lot of people. This guy, though, had a different take. His reaction was this, quote, "Did you notice that while Michelle Obama is working out on TV, she is sweating on the East Room's carpet? I'm just saying, ... The guy who tweeted that is named Rick Grinnell. Back in 2012, when he tweeted that, he was a Republican operative who had a very public habit of tweeting mean and frequently sexist things about the Obamas and about their kids, also about then Vice President Joe Biden, about prominent Democrats. He would also sometimes use his Twitter account to go after members of his own party as well. He repeatedly attacked former Republican Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. He liked to go after Newt Gingrich's wife. He would make fun of her hair. That was kind of his level of insult, insulting people's looks and their weight, attacking their families, particular venom for women in the public eye. He's a real nice guy. This became a little sticky, kind of, for Rick Grinnell when President Donald Trump surveyed the American landscape and decided that, above all other Americans, the best pick for ambassador to Germany would be that guy, Rick Grinnell. And there was talk when the nomination was announced that Grinnell's past behavior online might disqualify him from getting confirmed in the Senate because it was so mean and sexist and petty and ad hominem and gross. Turned out to be no problem, though, really. Ended up being smooth sailing. Mr. Grinnell and his archive of mean tweets were confirmed in the Senate with bipartisan support with votes to spare. Not a big deal, apparently. Right now, the current President Biden, is dealing with a confirmation speed bump for one of his nominees, though. Her name is Neera Tanden. She is President Biden's nominee to run the Office of Management and Budget, and her nomination drew immediate complaints from Republicans in the Senate, who complained, basically, that her past tweets about them were mean. They said her tweets about Republican lawmakers were too combative. They said her old tweets about them, long before she was a nominee, would just make it impossible for her to work with Congress. They would never work with her, given what she had tweeted. From the start, it looked as if Neera Tanden would receive few, if any, votes from Republican senators to confirm her to the job. In a 50-50 Senate, if every Republican votes against her, Neera Tanden would need every Democrat to vote in her favor in order to get confirmed. On Friday, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin announced that he won't vote to confirm Neera Tanden. He said it was because of her partisan statements on Twitter, and they would have he said those statements would have a toxic and detrimental impact on her work. Today, Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins also announced that Neera Tanden's tweets are a problem for her as well. She says they demonstrate that Ms. Tanden does not have the temperament to lead the OMB, which is a peculiar decision on the part of those senators, given that both of those senators had absolutely no problem supporting someone with a hyper-partisan Twitter warring history in the past. Susan Collins and Joe Manchin both voted to confirm Rick Grinnell in 2017, the guy who used his Twitter account to attack the sitting president's children, to mock a woman's hair, to attack all sorts of women for their appearance, to attack Michelle Obama for sweating on the East Room carpet. But for them, Neera Tanden's criticism of Republican senators, that's caustic and inappropriate, and so she must be barred from a Senate-confirmed position. Rick Grinnell's fine. Neera Tanden, They were not the only senators to announce they'll be voting no on the Tanden confirmation. Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman, who also voted to confirm Rick Grinnell, he announced his opposition to Neera Tanden today. So did Utah Senator Mitt Romney. There's still time, though, to find one Republican, any Republican vote for Ms. Tanden. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska was notably quiet today on the prospect. But until then, until a Republican senator decides that he or she will vote for Ms. Tanden, Tanden's nomination to lead OMB is hanging by a thread tonight because of the absolutely outrageous and overt double standard to which she is being subjected by even at least one Democratic senator who was happy to excuse much worse behavior than hers for a male nominee in a previous administration, but apparently has discovered some new standard that will keep her from getting his vote. Republicans have done it, at least one Democrat's doing it, and that might make the difference here. The Biden administration says they remain in full support of her nomination, and they are not pulling it. Watch this space.